Morning, guys. I'm Dave Canterbury with Self-Reliance Outfitters in the Pathfinder School, back out here at the Pathfinder Outdoor Classroom. I thought we'd cover another segment in our series on trapping tools and talk a little bit about smaller conibears. Larger conibears require a few extra things like stands and things of that nature. Smaller conibears don't require that. So as we're going, with the most simplistic type of trapping and progressing our way through, I think smaller conibears like 110s, 120s, 160s are probably the next place to go. Now, as we said before, generally speaking, that number is the pounds per square inch the trap has when it closes. However, different traps are different sizes when it comes to those numbers as well. So a 110 is the same size diameter-wise or in the box as a 120, but a 120 has 2 springs and a 110 has only 1 spring. The advantage to the 110 or the 120 over a 160, at least here in Ohio, is that a 120 can be set on dry land. A 160 has to at least be touching water, a natural water source, because of the size of the opening and the type of animal that can get his head through that opening. However, a 120 is plenty big enough to kill a mink. It's plenty big enough to kill a muskrat. So you can do a lot of fun trapping with these things, and it doesn't take a lot of peripheral equipment. So let's talk about that. Okay, so the first thing we need to understand is we're gonna need something to set this trap with. Now we can preset these springs, and we talked about that a little bit in our trap mechanism video. But carrying some type of a setting tool that doesn't take up a lot of room is always a good idea. And again, I'm always thinking about 5-gallon buckets when I think about this simple trapping stuff. This is gonna stand right up in a 5-gallon bucket, not take up a lot of room. It's not real heavy, and it's a good trap setter. If you have to do a reset or something like that, I always encourage you to set your traps ahead of time, put the safety latches on them before you get out there. It just makes things a lot faster. Then you're going to need a trap safety, and with a 110 or a 120, the 110s don't have a safety catch on the spring because there's only 1 spring. You definitely want to use something like this on top of that just catches on the upper jaws and is spring loaded so that that trap can't spring if for some reason the trigger is touched while you're setting the trap. So you definitely want to use this with a 110. A 120's got safety catches on the springs, but again, it's always a good idea to put that trap safety on there before you undo those safety latches. And this is the last thing you take with you. I always have an orange cord on mine, so it stands out to me. I didn't leave it at the set when I get ready to go. And it's big enough just to throw it around my neck if I need to on the way out. A piece of rope becomes a lot bigger deal with larger conibear type traps to get yourself out of them. And I've got videos on how to do that in my older trapping series. But a piece of rope is always a good idea to have with you just in case. Again, not such a big deal with smaller conibears, but a very big deal with larger conibears. All right, now that pretty much takes care of our safety equipment, our setting equipment. Now let's talk about the things we're going to use to create the set or make a trap set on location. It's pretty simple with these. Really, all you need, tool-wise, I always go for that pair of fence pliers. That fence pliers has got a hammer on it, it's got a puller on it. Those are important. It's also got an opening big enough to manipulate any quick links that you're using, so that's important as well. And it can cut wire. And wire is one of the things that you're going to want to carry, a small gauge roll of wire that you can use to wrap around a log or something like that from the spring eye to the spring eye. To lock that thing down on a log is important. Depending on the type trap you buy, some trap stands that you may buy don't work as well as others. The Belial traps, which are my favorite trap, by the way, have a little bit of a standoff right here. They don't work real well with the plates that you just nail to a log because they stand up too high to lock into that plate. But you really don't need that if you're just going to wrap those springs down on the log and then tie them off with a piece of wire. It's very, very simple. So you need wire cutters to cut that wire. That's where the fence tool comes in. Now, the other good thing about them, like I said, you can use them for muskrat and mink, not just on log crossings, but in areas where you have a small funnel, like a tributary or a creek that's coming into a larger body of water. A runoff area that is generally wet that goes into another body of water. Remember that mink are animals that are carnivores, but they hunt in the water or near the water. So they travel on land as well. So if you're putting this in a dry area where there's a tributary coming in, it's not always got water in it. doesn't necessarily matter. And with the 120, you can get away with that because you don't have to have water in there when you set the trap like you would a 160. So for that, you may want some kind of stabilizers. And I would suggest carrying a small folding saw like a Bahco, something that's pretty indestructible. And then I like to carry a small claw hatchet, okay? And these are antiques. They don't really make these anymore, but you can find these pretty readily online. This one's a plum. The advantage of this is it has an axe if I need to cut steaks or something like that, or trim them down to a point. But it also has a hammer, and it has a claw on it for pulling things. I've got that same type situation here for what we're going to talk about. However, the axe gives you other advantages because it's heavier than that fence tool is. One of the things that I do sometimes with these traps is when you're talking about anchoring a trap, even though it's a conibear, it's a killing type trap, you still want to anchor that trap somehow. If you've wired it around the tree on a log crossing, then you've got that trap anchored and it can't go anywhere. If you've just put stakes in the ground, if those stakes aren't long enough that you push through those springs, and we'll talk about that when we set some traps later on, if those stakes aren't long enough to hold that trap in place or they may get washed away or something like that, then you're going to want to stake it off to something else or connect it to something else. That could be an earth anchor into the bank, or that could be something like just wrapping a standoff cable around a close tree, in which case I've got a speed clip on here that will clip right onto the swivel eye of this trap. So I can use that multifunctionally for that. And I can use these speed clips and standoff cables. The other thing that I carry a lot of times with these type traps is I carry fence staples, okay? And a fence staple is a 1-inch fence staple. A fence staple you can hammer into any tree or any log, and you've got some standoff cable on this trap already. You've got about 2 foot or 1.5 foot, something like that, of standoff cable. You can hammer one of these fence nails right over top of this into a tree or into a log to give yourself that security. And then when you get back to that location, you want to pull that fence nail out, you've got the point of that fence plier to get right in there and yank those dudes right out and keep on going. So I generally carry a small empty coffee container. It's got some standoff cables in it, got a little bit of wire in it, and it's got probably 2 dozen fence staples in it and a couple of nails, all right? That gives me a lot of versatility of how I can anchor traps and things like that. If I were going to use earth anchors, I would just carry a bundle of earth anchors and earth anchor driver like we talked about in our video on coon cuffs. Again, doesn't weigh very much, stands right up in the 5-gallon bucket. So that pretty much goes through the tools of necessity for setting these smaller type body grip or conibear style traps. And again, your 110, your 120, you can put them pretty much anywhere, so they have a lot of versatility. Once you get up around the 160 mark, you need to check your local laws because here in Ohio, 160s have to at least be touching a natural body of water of some sort. So that's important to understand is the versatility of the trap you buy versus what you're trying to catch. If I'm going to go to a trap where I want to catch a coon or a possum or something like that, a larger animal, not including beaver, in a water scenario, then I'm just going to go to a 220. I'm going to forego the 160, go straight to a 220. Generally, my conibear setup is no 110s. I have about a dozen 120s. I have 2 or 3 160s that are like just in case measured traps for just the right location. Then I have 3 220s and 3 330s. And that pretty much will take care of my total conibear alignment and give me versatility to trap anything I want to around and in the water for sure. So that's just a quick video on the peripheral equipment you need to trap with smaller conibear traps. We'll talk about larger conibears later on. Now, one of the biggest advantages to these body grip type traps is you don't need to carry any bait. Every one of them is going to be a blind set. Hopefully you're going to set them on sign, or at least an area where you know animals have a travel route and there's some kind of a sign that it's a travel route, but you don't need any bait. You don't need any lure. And that's a big advantage to this type trapping. Guys, listen, I appreciate your views. I appreciate your support. I thank you for everything you do for our school, for our family, for our business, all our sponsors, instructors, affiliates, and friends. And I'll be back to another video in this series as soon as I can, guys. Thanks.